At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
This episode is brought to you by FX's The Beauty Official Podcast. Join host Evan Ross Katz on the official podcast for FX's hottest new series, The Beauty, taking you behind the scenes with its amazing stars as they discuss the show's most jaw-dropping moments. Featuring Evan Peters, Anthony Ramos, Jeremy Pope, Ashton Kutcher, Rebecca Hall, Bella Hadid, Meghan Trainor, Isabella Rossellini, Jessica Alexander, and Ari Grainer. Search FX's The Beauty wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello, everybody. It's Jay Scott here from The Hook, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Just wanted to do a little bit of an introduction for our episode airing today. It's with Ari Karnezis, who is way passionate about music, as I am, as most of you are. We had a great conversation about Chris Cornell, Soundgarden, Audioslave. I think you'll find it really interesting and a lot of fun. You can find her on Twitter at aknight1990. You can find her on YouTube at American Nightmare. And also her blog as well, which is really cool. It's Ari's Moody Tunes. It's moodytunes.home.blog. Please support her. I think you'll find what she writes and what she talks about as very real, very raw, and really honest. Hope you enjoy this episode. Let's go. This is Jay Scott, and you are listening to The Hook, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Hope everyone's having a great day today. Our guest today, our contributor today, is Ari at aknight1990, the Twitter feed, and also on YouTube at American Nightmare. How you doing, Ari?
Good. I'm doing really well.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. I appreciate you doing this. I know we've kind of chatted before. Yeah, we've chatted about what we want to talk about. But before we get into that, our first question to anyone who comes on the show the first time is in regards to the essence of the podcast, and that is the hook. Like every great song has a hook that sucks you in. Every rock and roll fan has a moment where a song, an album, a band, a performance suck them in and hook them on rock and roll. What was your moment? What hooked you on rock and roll?
For me, going way back, I would definitely say music from the 70s and 80s, like AC/DC, Twisted Sister. I grew up on both those bands, thanks to my dad. Soundgarden, of course. My dad was actually kind of a glam metal guy, and my mom was more of a grunge, fan. So, so that was, yeah, right. It was like, opposites attract, right?
Right, right, exactly.
So I grew up with a very, a really big variety of rock music, and it was just what I was raised on. And but I would definitely say the one band that definitely hooked me on rock and roll would probably be AC/DC.
Now, was it a particular album or song? What was it about AC/DC that hooked you?
Let me think. I would say I was raised on both Highway to Hell and Back in Black, so both the Bon Scott and Brian Johnson eras. I can't really think of like which song exactly got me hooked, but yeah, it was definitely like those two eras.
Excellent. What after AC/DC and Twisted Sister, how did your music taste evolve?
I would say my parents definitely helped me with that. when I was about 11, I had a bit of a punk phase until I was about 13 or 14. But like I said, I was kind of all over the place. I was really into heavy metal, and then I got into punk, like the more mainstream punk, like Green Day and Blink-182 and all that. So, and then when I was in high school, that was when I got into the grunge, 90s Seattle sounds, and I'd say ever since then, a lot of my music has been in the 90s era, 80s, 90s.
Now, what was it about the grunge movement that really attracted you?
Well, I would definitely say their lyrics and their ability to kind of be all over the place when it comes to music style. So like Soundgarden, for instance, that was the first grunge band that I got into. And every album was completely different. They still had their own, originality, like their own style, but like each album brought something new to the table. And Alice in Chains did the same thing with, Facelift to Dirt to Tripod, Jar of Flies, all that. Those were the two grunge bands that I was definitely more into. I never really got into Nirvana or Pearl Jam or anything like that. I was definitely more attracted to the heavier side of quote unquote grunge music.
Yeah, no, I agree. Being a child of the 80s and listening to the music, the hard rock and heavy metal music of that era, when everything kind of changed over, when the grunge movement came in, it was difficult for a guy like me to adjust to that type of music because it was so different than what I was used to listening to. And the two bands that I always liked because they had a heavier sound were Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. In fact, I saw Anthrax and Alice in Chains. I saw Alice in Chains open up for them, back in the 90s. And it was a great show. And they put on a great performance. But I was always attracted to those two, along with Stone Temple Pilots, because they had a little bit more of an edge to them, more so than like you. Yeah, more so than like you with Pearl Jam and Nirvana, who I never really got into Nirvana. And Pearl Jam took me a while to warm up to them. I appreciate their music. I guess I can consider myself a fan, but I wouldn't put them in one of my top 5 or top 10 favorite bands.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Pearl Jam, that was the same way for me. It took me a while to warm up to them too, because I do like a few songs. I think I have a couple albums from them, but I would sit down, I would listen to them, and it's like, man, this is not, it's not the same, And that's the thing about the Seattle sound. Each band, there wasn't really much of a Seattle sound. It was just basically a group of bands that all happened to know each other and kind of just did their own thing. Mm-hmm. And that was the other thing that attracted me to the grunge movement. And you mentioned Stone Temple Pilots too. Besides Soundgarden, they were definitely another one of the first grunge bands that I got into.
Yes, great band. One of the things that was such a contrast from that movement coming out of the 80s glam or metal scene was the difference in tone of the song. You really had more of a fun party type atmosphere with the bands of the 80s. Of course, there were your Iron Maidens and there were your Metallicas and Anthraxes and whatnot, but the majority and the bands that were huge at that time, Metallica really didn't break mainstream until 89 with One, or was it 88? And then, of course, they had the Black Album in 92 or 91. But the whole atmosphere, the Van Halen, the Aerosmiths, the Motley Crues, it was a completely different atmosphere. And it was an adjustment. Being a fan of that music, it was not something that happened overnight. It took me a while to warm up to a few of those bands. Another one that I liked too was Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh yeah, Smashing Pumpkins is great.
Yeah, local to Chicago here as well.
Yes.
But the irony of this conversation is that we are going to be talking about Soundgarden today, and this is going to be pre-recorded on May 18th, which just so happens to be the 2-year anniversary of the passing of Chris Cornell.
Yes. Yeah.
And I have to tell you, if you haven't checked out her YouTube page, Ari's really passionate about the subject matter of Soundgarden and Chris Cornell, along with Alice in Chains, and she's got some really good stuff on her YouTube page. Once again, that's American Nightmare. And we're going to talk about the music of Soundgarden today.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, by the way. Thank you for plugging my channel there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's begin. I mean, I am a fan of Chris Cornell. I was a fan of Soundgarden. In terms of Chris Cornell's music, I was more of a fan of Audioslave. Another great band.
You know what? I gotta say, me too. Me too. I actually got into Audioslave before I got into Soundgarden. The first time I heard Audioslave, I was probably about 10 or 11 years old. I was probably closer to 11, and I was just, oh my god, it was amazing. And it took me a little bit longer to get into Soundgarden, but eventually that happened too. And yeah, I was just blown away. I'm blown away by everything he does.
Yeah, such an amazing talent. Of course, it's a shame that he's no longer here with us and making music. And one of my biggest disappointments is the fact that I never got to see him in concert. And I've seen hundreds of bands and hundreds of concerts. And there's a handful that I have that I wish I could have seen. And Chris Cornell is definitely at the top of the list. Thankfully, we have things like YouTube where we can see performances. But as you know, it's just not the same as getting that, the goosebumps of seeing such a great talent in concert.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So let's begin. We want to talk about the music and the albums of Soundgarden. I figured kind of mix it up a little bit. Instead of starting from the first album, let's start with your favorite album.
Okay. I had a feeling you'd ask me this. So, I would definitely say, a lot of people say Super Unknown, and, of course I agree. I love Super Unknown. Every song on that album is a masterpiece, and that album was so well composed and orchestrated. But I would definitely say, personal preference, my favorite album is actually Bad Motorfinger, the album before Super Unknown, because for one, that was probably the very first grunge album that I bought, that I owned, and that one is it's definitely a lot heavier, and I think it's hard to say because it's very subjective, but in terms of vocal range, Chris Cornell did a lot more on Bad Motorfinger. He sang the high notes and all that, and he just went, freaking wild with some of his vocals, like on Slaves and Bulldozers. And that's always what attracted to me. That's always what attracted me to his style, and that's why Soundgarden's my favorite band.
Yeah, no, his delivery on that album, vocal wise, is incredible. And, the songwriting, some really memorable songs on that album. One of the most memorable lyrics is on that album, Look in California, Feel in Minnesota. And just and it just proved how introspective he was on what he was writing about. So would you go Super Unknown number 2, or where would you go after that album?
Definitely, yeah. Super Unknown would definitely be a very close number 2, and hell, even on different days, it could be Super Unknown 1, Bad Motorfinger 2. But I think always, in my heart of hearts, deep down, I think Bad Motorfinger is probably the most attractive, my personal favorite Soundgarden album.
Now, what are the songs that connect with you on that album, and why do they connect with you?
I would say the first one that comes to mind would be Room 1,000 Years Wide, because that also showed how eclectic Soundgarden was, because that song has a freaking saxophone in it.
Yeah.
So it's like they kind of borrowed from everything, every genre of music, jazz, heavy blues, heavy metal, a little bit of punk, and then of course, they're labeled grunge because that's how it goes.
What else? I mean, like, so they connect you. So why did they connect with you? Like, what was about those songs that, gave you that passion about their music?
Well, songs like Room a Thousand Years Wide and Outshined, like you said, their lyrics were so introspective. Chris Cornell actually wrote Outshined, but the guitarist, Kim Sayo, I really hope I'm saying his name right, I can never get that right, but he actually wrote the lyrics to Room a Thousand Years Wide. And seeing like all members of the band contribute to, pieces of the album, that is also what made me so that's what made me so attracted to songs like that, because it's like, you're mostly thinking about like Chris Cornell when it comes to Soundgarden, but it's like, hey, these other guys have a lot to offer too. So, and Kim Sayo apparently, just reading the lyrics to Room a Thousand Years Wide, he had just as much to offer as Chris Cornell in terms of lyricism and any sort of like philosophical musings about the world, about people around them and everything.
Yeah. Is there a song on that album that maybe didn't grab you at first, but I'm a big fan of believing that music is all about timing, and sometimes a song or a band maybe doesn't grab you at the moment when it grabs everybody else, but then 5, 6 years, 10 years later, you hear a song by that same band, and for whatever reason, whether it's you had more life experiences, whether you are, your tastes have opened up a little bit, for whatever reason, it's almost like hearing a new song, and you rediscover this band that you kind of gave a pass way back when, where now you're playing catch up and you're discovering what you believe is new music to you when everybody else has been listening to, for a decade or more.
Definitely. Yeah. That's happened to me with a lot of songs. But on Bad Motorfinger specifically, I'd say the first one that comes to mind is Drawing Flies. That's one of their deep cuts. It's, a shorter song, but it's so like fast paced. But originally it's like, when I first heard it, it's like, what the hell is he talking about? It's like, what? It's like, what is this song? But, after a few more listens, it's like, oh my God, this song is, this song is amazing. It's, it works. It fits,
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, yeah, I would definitely say.
Yeah, I love when that happens. You listen to an album, and I always try to give it 2 or 3 spins before I really kind of make a judgment on it to see how it connects with me. And
sure, yeah.
It happens all the time where a song doesn't grab me at first, and then I'll listen to that album a year or 2 later, and I'll be like, oh, this is a really good song. Like, why didn't I like this before?
Yeah.
And it happens a lot. So it really does. Like, so I always get upset, when I hear people converse or, message each other, oh, your music sucks, or that song sucks. It doesn't. I know everyone's music taste is different, and everyone's music is more or less, and I've said it before, their own religion, and it's grabbed them, and it's part of their soul, it's part of their being, and everyone's palate's different. So I understand the machismo of saying, oh, this sucks and this sucks, but that song may suck to you now, but 10 years from now, you may rediscover it and think it's one of the best songs you've ever heard.
Definitely. Yeah.
So after Bad Motorfinger, they released Super Unknown.
Yes.
They're arguably their biggest record, their biggest album, pretty much what they're most known for. How does that album connect with you differently than the previous one?
I would say Super Unknown is definitely a lot more personal for me than Bad Motorfinger. With Bad Motorfinger, you have, speedy guitars and, wailing vocals and all that. But Super Unknown, you have that too, but you also have a lot more personal, deep, lyrics. So like the song Fell on Black Days, that was the song that really got me into Soundgarden, was Fell on Black Days. It's so bleak, but at the same time, it's like some days it's like, you listen to it, and every second of it, you really get into it, and you feel exactly what he's feeling. He had that way about him,
Yeah, absolutely. When you can put the listener in your own head and connect with them in that regard, it's a wonderful thing. It really is, and not too many people can do that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Fell on Black Days, was the one that connected with you first. What other songs on that album have a connection with you?
Definitely The Day I Tried to Live. And see, this is what kind of makes me angry about a song like that. Ever since Chris Cornell died, people have, and even before he died, people have completely misinterpreted that song. It's like he said, in interviews back in the 90s, they're taking the word live too seriously, and they think it's a suicide note or something. No, that's not what it is. It's literally about trying your best to not be antisocial and trying to put yourself out there into the world, and in a way, trying to be like everybody else. Maybe to be happier, or to just find some more company instead of, being alone all the time. And that's what the song is about. And that was another one of the songs that really made me appreciate Chris Cornell as a lyricist, because that's how I was, when I was younger, in high school and all that. I was the exact same way. So being that age, 15 and kind of not really sure what I'm doing, in terms of that. That's a song that really connected with me on a personal level and really helped me in some tough times.
That's a great thing about music. Music connects as a companion. It can help you. It can comfort you. It can help motivate you. It can do all those things. And people who really connect with the music utilize that throughout their lives. And one of the greatest interviews I ever heard was when David Lee Roth of Van Halen said, when you hear a song, listen to it, wear it out, listen to it over and over again, because after a certain point, that song acts as a time machine, because whenever you hear it, it brings you back to that period of time when it connected with you, and all the memories that surrounded that moment come back to life. And it's a very good point. It's a very, very interesting way to look at music. And I believe that.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. I had no idea that David Lee Roth said that.
If you wanna watch some interesting stuff, watch the David Lee Roth show on YouTube. And everybody has an image of David Lee Roth doing the splits and, shaking his hair in the videos. He is a very, very
kind of a wild party guy.
Yeah, but he is a very well-read and very intelligent person. And for anyone out there listening, if they want to spend, in their car, you can put it on. It's a podcast, and it's the David Lee Roth show. And he had one prior, an older one. But he is such an interesting dude, and he knows a lot about life and a lot about things. He's very intelligent, very well-read, and I encourage you to give his podcast a couple listens, because it's great.
Definitely.
So
yeah, I'm gonna have to do that myself.
Yeah, check it out. I'm telling you, you won't be. You can thank me later, Ari.
I will. I'm sure I will.
So, Super Unknown, Bad Motorfinger are the albums that connect with you. Where do the other albums fall in your realm and in your listening habits?
Well, I would say after Bad Motorfinger, each album after that, that's kind of where my rankings go to. So after Super Unknown, there was Down on the Upside, which has songs like Pretty Noose and No Attention, Burden in My Hand, Blow Up the Outside World. That is an amazing album. I know it doesn't really compare to Super Unknown and Bad Motorfinger, but there's still like a lot of deep cuts on there that are just as hard hitting as everything on Super Unknown. one of the songs that I really got into, and this was another one where it was like, I first heard it and it's like, oh, it's okay, it's a little slow. But then after I read the lyrics, it was like, whoa, oh my God. It's like, how have I not, how did I not, hear this before? And that song was Zero Chance.
Okay.
That one it's a lot more mellow, but it's, oh my God, when you read the lyrics, it's like, oh my God, it's kind of hard to put into words, but it's like, that's the feeling. It's like you're left completely speechless with a song like that.
So what is it about those lyrics? I mean, can you speak to how it affected you or how it connected with you?
Well, the song kind of has the same subject material as The Day I Tried to Live. The chorus is a lot more bleak and it's a lot deeper. So it goes, let me think. Sorry.
That's okay.
Let me think about this. They say if you look hard, you'll find your way back home, born without a friend and bound to die alone.
Wow.
And that was a line that like hit me really hard. And, especially after he died, that was one that I started to appreciate a lot more, the deeper I got into that album.
It's another great album. I have that in my collection too. I've got all three of those albums. What would be the one that you would think is the most underrated?
Most underrated? I would say for sure Down on the Upside.
Okay.
It's that's one where a lot of the deep cuts, like the deep cuts are actually, in my opinion, some of them are better than the singles, because most people know that album for like Pretty Noose and all that, and but Tighter and Tighter and No Attention, Overflowed is one of my favorite Soundgarden songs. That one is absolutely amazing.
Now, after that album, what in the collection of Soundgarden is something that you like to listen to?
After that album, I would say their second album, Louder Than Love. That one's a lot more different. That one came out in the 80s, and that one actually kind of follows a little more of the glam metal side, but like in a satirical way. So they have songs like Big Dumb Sex, where it's basically a glam metal song, but it's also kind of spitting in the face of glam metal. It's hilarious. And it's also a really fun song.
It's interesting. I saw an interview with Chris Cornell about a month or two ago, one that I had not seen yet. And he talks about the glam metal scene, and he talks about how music got to be more about the look and about the image than it did about the song. And I completely agree with him. I've always said that the 80s is really kind of three parts. The beginning of the 80s is more edgy. It's a lot more raw. You go from the mid 80s where the glam movement begins, especially after, if you ever get a chance to look at the back cover of Theater of Pain by Motley Crue and you see the image of Motley Crue, everything that comes after that is because of that back cover of that album. And then you have the late 80s, early 90s, where bands were getting signed not because of how they played, but because of how they looked. I remember when I would go to the grocery store with my mother when I was a kid, and I didn't want to sit in aisle to aisle and go and shop with my mom. So I went to the magazine section, and I would take out all the rock magazines, and I would just start reading about bands and interviews with some of my favorites back then. But I remember towards the end of the decade, when I started looking at magazines, there were bands that I never even heard of, but looked like other bands. And I think when Chris Cornell speaks of that, I think a lot of people want to blame Nirvana as killing the 80s glam metal scene. And there's, I kind of believe Metallica had more to do with it. But in the end, the bands themselves and the music themselves is what's to blame, because the music got very thin in the end, and it got very kind of cookie cutter-ish with one band.
Definitely.
Yeah, one band did look like the other band, and they all sounded the same. You couldn't tell them apart, and it really lost its identity. And the grunge movement comes with Nirvana, although I never connected with Nirvana for whatever reason. It just never grabbed me. there was a whole new scene, a whole new sense of center with the lyrics, with the presentation, where it was more about the music. It was more about like the early 80s and the 70s, where it was more about the music and what they were singing about than it was about how high their hair was teased and how much, what their leather pants looked like. It was such a refreshing look, but it went completely in the opposite direction. It's like the glam metal scene went as far as it possibly could, and then this grunge scene just brought it back the complete other way. And I think Soundgarden, everyone talks about Nirvana and Pearl Jam as kind of being the big two out of that era, because they're probably the most popular. Because they had more songs on. Nirvana had It Smells Like Teen Spirit and the other songs, and of course Pearl Jam has their catalog. But
of course.
And I know you mentioned your college professor. When he started talking about the grunge era, of course he brings in Nirvana. But I think Alice, I think Alice in Chains and Soundgarden offered so much more to the listener, because I think they were way more complex than Nirvana and Pearl Jam.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think if you were to start, if you never heard grunge music, or if you're one of those people who grew up in that era like I did, who absolutely refute it, right? There's people that will not even listen to any of that music just because they're still harbor this anger towards that movement. It's killing that scene. But if you were to pick, if you were to pick a couple bands out of that era that are extremely talented, extremely complex, great music, heavier music, it's definitely Soundgarden and Alice in Chains.
For sure. Definitely.
So when I look at your YouTube page and your posts on Twitter, you're also a big Chris Cornell fan. I mean, your appreciation for Chris Cornell doesn't stop with just Soundgarden. And you mentioned in the beginning of this interview that you actually like Audio Slave. So following his career, what is it about Chris Cornell outside of Soundgarden, outside of Audio Slave, that connects with you?
Well, if you were to watch like any interview with him, you'll notice he's not very, what's the word I want? He's not outlandish. He doesn't have a big ego. He doesn't really think he's, king shit or whatever. Mm-hmm. He's incredibly down to earth. He's so humble and he's so honest. Anytime anybody asks him about, his music or, his fame, he doesn't really give like a generic, cookie cutter answer. He really just, he's like I said, he's honest. He's honest. He's incredibly intelligent. He's, and like I said, he's so down to earth. And that's what made me appreciate him as a musician and as a lyricist more, because, when you think about rock stars, a lot of rock stars, especially if you're not a fan of rock music, you think they have these big egos and they think they're the greatest singer in the world. And the thing is, Chris Cornell was one of the greatest singers in the world, but he would never tell you that. He would probably be like, yeah, I'm all right. But really, listen to these guys. He was always like thinking about other musicians that he thought were, that he was influenced by, that he seemed to promote more than himself.
That's true. Yeah, he's very humble. It's one of the things that's I've always appreciated about him is when you don't get the rock, he's a rock star, but you don't get the rock star, the lead singer disease ego that a lot of people in his position have. I one of the things that when people talk about his death and they talk about his music, it's mentioned sometimes, but not as much as I think it should, is how he overcame addiction. He was pretty messed up, during the height of during the height of Soundgarden. And, he cleaned himself for a long time. And I know this is a sensitive subject for a lot of people. I know he was taking medication for that addiction, But that medication that he had side effects. And one of those side effects, unfortunately, was suicidal thoughts. So, when they talk about his death and they talk about him taking his own life, I don't think he was of sound of mind because of the medication that he was on.
I'm really glad you brought this up, actually, because I never like to talk about it too much, because it's always like, appreciate his music, appreciate what he did while he was here. Don't focus on his death, don't focus on how he died. Just like with Lane Staley, addiction, unfortunately he never overcame it. But Chris Cornell, he did get sober, and he was sober for a long time. The problem was, like you said, he was on that medication. And like you said, one of the side effects was, suicidal ideation. But the thing is, something like that, you almost have to be sort of hush about, because there's the topic of, mental illness, with Kurt Cobain. It's almost like the grunge scene. A lot of people think, it's either drugs or suicide, and it's like, no, that's not the case. It's so much more than that. It's not even that. That's the thing. I'm kind of getting off topic here, but yeah, going back to what you said, I'm really glad you brought that up, and I'm glad, some people have more of an open mind about that, because yes, Chris Cornell did deal with stuff like that for a while, but when you look closer into it, there was something else wrong there that had nothing to do with him.
No, absolutely. I mean, there are witnesses who talk about him before, even the day before, and hours leading up to the show, where he was fine, he was normal. And I don't know what transpired in the last few hours of his life, but from what I read, and I don't know if this is out there or if this is actual fact, but from what I read or remember reading, he had taken more than he probably should have on the medication that he was, and that really could have affected his mind.
Yes, yeah, definitely. The drug that he was prescribed, from what I read, it was for a shoulder injury he had a few years ago, and it was keeping him up at night, and he needed, and of course touring, extensively, that has an effect on the body. And so I think he was taking it just to sleep. But again, one of the main side effects was, suicidal thoughts, unfortunately. And combined with, unfortunately, the other stuff that he was taking, I think he was taking some severe cold medicine that, based on personal experience, that stuff is combined with other medications that can really, mess you up.
So he wasn't on medication to assist in his addiction, in his urges. It was more for the shoulder injury.
Yeah, I think so. I believe so. For a while, he was on the, years ago, I think he was on some of the, combating addiction, medication. But I think up to the time of his death, I'm not exactly sure if that is what, if that's the reason why he was taking that medication.
It's another example of being overprescribed. I mean, how many lives have been lost? And we can name the famous people, but there's countless others across the country that have been lost because of overprescribing or doctors mixing medications, and they don't truly know what the side effects are or how an individual will react if they are on different sets of medication, unbeknownst to one doctor to the next. And you just have to ask yourself, how does this continue to happen when we have the technology that could allow one doctor to the next doctor to see what a man or woman is taking when they're under care? Yeah, definitely. That's, unfortunately, that kind of gets put on the back burner because, of course we have, a lot of other things going on, in the world, but a lot of what we don't talk about that's really affecting us is the legal drugs, because of course we're thinking of when we think of drugs, we think of the illegal heroin and,
everything like that.
Sure.
But, it's some of the legal stuff, it's just as bad or even worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't get talked about because it's like, we trust doctors and everything. But like you said, everybody's being overprescribed, and it's a serious problem.
Yeah, it is a definite serious problem. And going back to Chris Cornell with what happened to him, one has to think, listen, when people have a lot of money, like a Chris Cornell or like any other rock star or actor or athlete, they have access to things that you and I don't have. And, they have money to gain them that access. And I'm not saying Chris Cornell did this or whatever, but there are probably instances in situations where someone does pay someone to get an extra prescription or a prescription to this without going through the proper channels. And that could definitely affect what people are doing and mixing, having a cocktails of medication. But it all goes back to another issue that kind of coincides with the overprescribing and the addictions is the mental health issue. And, when you're taking a lot of those drugs, it really does affect your psychosis. It affects your mind. Whether you want to believe it or not, you're putting a foreign agent into your body that mixes with the chemical. And I think a lot of that with Chris Cornell affected him. And it affected his outlook in his mind. I mean, people who went to the show said he looked a little off during the show, so I don't know when he had taken the medication. But by all accounts, up to leading to that day, he was of healthy mind and of sound mind. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not an insider. I'm not someone that has information behind me that I know of that no one else knows of. But just based on the circumstances, I mean, he seemed to be fine. There are people that had talked to him a day or two before, or even that day. I think his wife even talked to him that day before the show. He seemed fine. So something happened.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we'll ever know what happened or how things transpired to the exact moment that he did pass. But it definitely was a great loss. When you think of the two monster bands that he was in, Soundgarden and Audioslave, and plus his solo work, which gets overlooked. His solo work is just as magnificent as his, the stuff with Soundgarden and
of course,
Audioslave, and then there's Temple of the Dog. It's just it goes on. It's such a body of work for an individual that went too soon. What do you think he would be doing, or where do you think Chris Cornell would have evolved to? I mean, I know he was doing the Soundgarden. I know there were talks about him doing another Audioslave tour or album. I know Tom Morello spoke of it shortly after his death. He definitely had his solo material. Where do you think he was going musically?
I think he was probably going back to his roots with Soundgarden and Audioslave. Unfortunately, they were actually working. Soundgarden was actually working on a new album, and they had the music down before Chris died. And with Audioslave, they performed a show, the anti-inaugural ball. And man, when I heard that they were getting back together, even if it was just for one night, I was like, yes, it's like, yes, it's finally happening. So I think it was entirely possible. We probably could have seen a fourth Audioslave album, a seventh, I think, Soundgarden album. And one of the songs that was posthumously released, When Bad Does Good, we probably could have seen some more solo work from him. And but I think it was entirely possible that he was, trying to put all the bands back together. And yeah, that would have been really cool to see. And that's the other reason why the whole thing is such a tragedy. It's so sad. We could have, thinking like what could have been. That's the hardest thing to think about.
For sure. Yeah. No, what could have been. And where I always love when an artist evolves. In fact, a lot of these episodes have moments in them when I talk about the evolution of a certain musician. Whether it's a Randy Rhoads and whether it's a Richie Kotzen or whether it's another band. I love it when they don't just mail it in and play the same thing that they've played before. We all know the bands that do that. And that's one of the things that I always appreciate of Chris Cornell, whether he was in Soundgarden or Audioslave or his solo stuff. He always tried to stretch himself. He always tried to test his own limits. And as a music fan and someone that digs new perspective, he was always doing that. He was all, whether he did a cover of a song and the way he approached it was completely different than what the song was. I mean, everyone has seen the One video where it's the music for the U2 song One and it's the lyrics for the Metallica song One.
Yeah.
Who would have thought to do that? And Chris Cornell did. It's incredible.
I think what ended up happening with that was he was trying to get the lyrics to U2's One, and he was going to do a cover of U2, but somebody gave him the lyrics to Metallica's One, and he just went with it, and it worked.
Yeah, it did. It was a really special moment. Even the cover version of "Nothing Compares to You," which is the song written by Prince for Sinead O'Connor, incredible, absolutely incredible. It's spine tingling how great that version is.
Oh yeah, definitely. After Prince died, I listened to that cover on loop. It was like 10 times a day, like clockwork. It's like, oh, I got to hear this song. It's like I can't get enough of it.
What is
beautiful rendition?
Yeah, it is an emotional rendition, especially now that he's passed, and that Prince is no longer with us. It's such a song that connects people of the Prince fan base with the Chris Cornell fan base, and it's such an amazing moment. It really is. What if you had to choose your quintessential Chris Cornell song? What would that be?
Oh, man. I would say, for me, quintessential Chris Cornell song, that would probably be Audioslave's "Shadow on the Sun."
Great song.
Yes, yeah, definitely. That's for personal lives. That's definitely like my favorite Chris Cornell song. Like he, out of his entire career. But not to mention, he kind of puts the whole song has a little bit of everything from his previous careers. Introspective lyrics, hard rock, a great hook, great rhythm, and that was what got me into Chris Cornell's music initially. And it's like, I still don't know what the song is about exactly or what he's talking about specifically, but it's like you can kind of interpret it for yourself. It's kind of one of those open-ended ones that you can just pick out a line and it's like, okay, this is what he could be talking about, or this is what I get out of it. This is how I feel about it.
Definitely. I love all the Audioslave stuff. And that's kind of one of the things that was disappointing about that band is that, they had 3 great albums and then they just didn't make music anymore. It wasn't like there was this big to do that they were breaking up. They just decided to go their own ways. And I think they left on good terms. I mean, I read some stuff where there were some issues with some of the band members, but I think that's in every band. I mean, tell me what band who isn't popular that doesn't have egos colliding and
exactly.
Yeah,
it's kind of inevitable. It's like when you're writing music with a certain number of people for a certain number of years, chances are somewhere along the way you're going to end up having some problems.
Yeah, and especially personality-wise. I mean, you've probably, in most bands, because they're on stage and they're creating music and they're playing for hundreds of thousands of people, they're pretty much all A-type personalities, right? I mean, no one goes on stage and puts themselves out there unless they're that type of guy or that type of girl, And when you're writing and you think your stuff that you're writing is the best, and so does every other, the 3-4 other members of the band think that, their stuff is great too, it does cause issues. And then you add the lifestyle in there. It's amazing how some bands can stay intact for a long time and some, really kind of fizzle away. Not that Audioslave fizzled. It's just I do remember reading about some potential personality clashes, and then they stopped. And that was was it the Revolution album? Was their last one?
Oh, Revelations.
Revelations. I'm sorry. And So I remember reading that, but I always knew that Tom Morello and Chris Cornell, and I don't know about the other two guys in the band, always stayed in touch and always had a good relationship. They wouldn't have been able to do that show after the anti-inaugural ball show if they hadn't had a good relationship.
Of course.
And it's kind of what happened with Soundgarden. I'm not too familiar with the details with how Soundgarden broke up, but they kind of ended the same way Audioslave did. They kind of just moved on to different things. And, maybe that's just, indicative of those bands at that time, or the way Chris Cornell likes to move from different projects to different projects, or maybe not move to different projects, but find ways to stretch himself musically and artistically.
Definitely. Even shortly before Audioslave broke up, Chris Cornell was already writing songs for his second solo album, Carry On, and those were the kinds of songs that probably didn't belong on an Audioslave album, but he wrote them anyway. And I think the creative process for him, there's, like I said, I don't know anything. This is just my guess, but maybe he felt a little too, confined being an Audioslave. Like he couldn't really, there wasn't any way for him to expand, and he wanted to move on to other things.
Very true, and that happens way more than we'd like it to happen. Where a band is together and they're producing great music, album after album, and they can't, certain artists within the band can't put a certain song on an album because it's just not what their fan base is expecting. And that's almost on us as fans as much as it is the band, right? I mean, the fans, when they hear a certain artist, the majority of the fans want what they know, what they're familiar with. Anytime you go off that grid and you start experimenting and you ask the listener to evolve with them, that doesn't always happen. I can't think of an instance where maybe a band like Rush, as they evolved in the 80s with the keyboards, more keyboard heavy songs, but that fan base is so rabid that they'll accept anything by Rush.
Oh yeah.
But that's one example. But bands that changed their musically, changed drastically, I always experience them going back to what they sounded like because maybe that newer music wasn't as well received. And I think that's really on us as fans that we need to learn that we can take the journey with the artist as well. Just don't have any expectations. Just listen and see if you like it. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Definitely. I think that's one of the reasons why Soundgarden was so underrated is because, like I said in the beginning of this, every album is different, and each time they're evolving their own sound, or maybe they're going back to their roots while adding something new to the table. And that's the thing, and that's probably why they're so underrated, and, they didn't sell as many records or anything, but it's like they were very eclectic bands. They had, different. They pulled from different genres, and each album was something new.
Absolutely, absolutely. In closing, what final thoughts do you have on Soundgarden and their music catalog? Where would you tell someone to begin if they wanted to go and listen to them for the first time?
Well, I would say start pretty much anywhere. Because like I said, they have a lot to offer, but, give them a chance. If there's something that you don't like right away, maybe move on to another song. But don't be, keep an open mind. And even with something like, Soundgarden and Audio Slave, it's one of the main things I would tell them is even though, it may not be what you're expecting, just go with the flow. Just go along for the ride. And you definitely won't regret it. This is definitely a band that everybody should listen to at least once in their life.
Yep. I mean, sometimes the journey takes you into unexpected routes, but nonetheless, it's a journey, and it's go along for the ride. You may enjoy it. You may love it. There are so many bands that I passed on when I was growing up that I went back and listened to years later, that it's like discovering a whole new band. And I do get frustrated when people don't want to listen to new music, the quote unquote music lovers and fans. I love music. I'm such a music fan. And then you put something new or different in front of them and they reject it almost immediately without even listening. And the fan really needs to rise up and step up and give things a chance. Get out of your box, and try something different.
Yeah. Get out of your comfort zone. It's almost like kind of like a little kid, trying something, like trying a new food for the first time. It's like, no, I don't like this, but it's like, you haven't even tried it, just don't be afraid to try new things. And that goes for pretty much anything in the world, but music especially.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ari, it was a pleasure having you on. Once again, you can find her on Twitter at aknight1990 and on YouTube at American Nightmare. Her video blogs and presentation are incredible. A lot of passion about the music she loves. I highly recommend it. And again, I do appreciate you coming on and being on the show, and I look forward to having you on again down the road.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to do this again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Take care and have yourself a good day, and I'll see you on Twitter.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.